Hey team, I'm Macy Bolt. I'm coming at you from Madison, Wisconsin. And today we are going to talk about 5 tips for introducing jumping to our older adult patients. So, the 5 tips that we're going to go through start with education, respect irritability, make it infinitely scalable, strategize for home, and number 5 is celebrate. So, for education, that might really look different for everyone, depending on the reason that you're introducing jumping for these folks. So, it's really important to, as we talk about a lot in the MMOA community, make it meaningful for these people. So, knowing the why behind why are we introducing jumping and impact, it can really help with buy in and can really reduce the fear related to a task that is totally new and unfamiliar to these people. It can be a really scary thing to introduce jumping and impact because a lot of times they've been told by family members, other healthcare providers to go slow, to be safe, and to do low impact things only, like water walking and chair yoga to protect their joints from exploding. For some patients, you really may be educating on like the basics of why is it important to put impact and load through our joints. For bone health, for building that, resilience through the bony tissue. And then for others, you may be using jumping as a way to kind of improve their power production and improve the speed with which they're moving. Um, we know that as we age, those type 2 muscle fibers, they deteriorate more quickly. And so getting speed and getting that power production through, how we're having these folks move is so, so important. So that might may be the education point that you're really focusing on with a specific patient or individual. And then sometimes we're using it as a way to really help these people recover from a loss of balance. Um, the key with a stepping strategy is that you have to be able to move quickly. If you're losing your balance, speed is your friend because that stepping strategy requires that quick movement in order for you to react in a way that is going to protect you from falling. So, education that is really meaningful to the patient in front of you, that is valuable education. If you just word vomit all of the things you know about jumping and impact at these people, it is going to go so far over their head. It's not going to be anything valuable for them. So make sure that you're kind of tailoring your education to the person that you're speaking to. Um, it really is gonna just make it more salient for these people, make it more impactful for why you're having them introduce some of these movement patterns that are so far out of their comfort zone usually. So that's number 1, educate first. Number 2, and I really think that this one is one of the most important when it comes to our older adult patients, because we know a lot of times these folks come into us with pain as their primary complaint. That's how they end up in our clinics. That's how we end up in their homes. And so pain being on board can be one of the biggest limitations when it comes to impact activities and jumping. And I have done this wrong. So learn from my mistakes. This is a perfect case for intentional underdosage because we are introducing something totally new and novel to them most of the time. A lot of these folks, you have not jumped in a long, long time. And so starting small, you may start with something like upper extremity supported stomping, and that is okay. There's nothing wrong with making these exercises easy to start with to make them feel really approachable for these people. And then, educate them and really get them to understand that like stomping day 1 eventually will lead us to you getting both feet off the ground. And that is a really cool thing to kind of give them that perspective of here's where we're going with this and here's where you're going to end up if we keep working at this. Um, the other things that I find work really well for irritable joints when it comes to jumping is sometimes giving a more compliant surface. So in my clinic, we have like a gymnastics mat, and I use that a lot when I'm introducing impact because it just takes away that, a little bit of that ground reaction force, but still gets them moving their body into the ground with some power production. So thinking about, is there a way that I can make the surface a little more compliant to start with so that it's more comfortable for the patient? Because if the patient is uncomfortable with these exercises and it makes their pain worse, there's nothing that you're going to do that makes the patient believe, wow, this is really going to be a good thing for me if it's making, their knee or their hip pain more flared up. So this is also where I tend to give my folks a lot of autonomy. So we may try, 3 or 4 different exercises in session to just see what works. And then at the end of the session, we sit down and I say, okay, what of those exercises do you feel like you can successfully do at home? What do you feel like would go well? And then that's kind of where we send them home with a home program is with what they feel confident in, with what they feel comfortable with. And usually I find that that really, really helps with compliance at home as well. So, respecting irritability kind of goes right in to making it scalable for the patient in front of you. Again, intentional underdosage is key here as you're introducing these movements so that we can be successful in getting patients to actually do this stuff. That sometimes is the hardest part is, they do them in clinic when we're there encouraging them, when we're in front of them in their homes, but then we leave each other and we may not see each other for a week or two. And then it's like, okay, how'd it go? And they're like, well, I was a little afraid to do it when you weren't there. And that is where really we need to put our rehab professional hats on and say, how can I make this scalable for the patient? Many times, the things I'm doing in clinic are more challenging than the things that I'm sending them home with, and that is perfectly appropriate. Our job is to challenge these folks, and that might not be appropriate for them to do when they're on their own. So, making it scalable, making it so that my patient knows, hey, if I'm not going to see you for 3 weeks, here are a couple of ways that you can level this up to make it more challenging if you're feeling up for, if your knee pain is under control and you feel like I'm ready for the next step here, Macy, here's how I'm going to make this harder for myself. So really giving them kind of that autonomy, that independence to feel like I know how to make this harder, it really gets them kind of thinking like a provider, which I think is one of the most valuable things we can give to our patients because eventually we are going to discharge these folks from skilled care. And if they are already in that sense of thinking like a professional, thinking like a provider, that is going to help them transition to eventually what fitness might look like. And hey, this exercise is feeling too easy for me now. What are some ways I can make this more challenging? So then the key is, and we've kind of touched on this a little bit already, but collaboratively strategizing for home. So some of you may be fortunate enough to actually be in the patient's home with them, where you can troubleshoot some of these environments and really make sure that the patient feels that they can be safe and successful introducing impact and jumping in whatever environment they're in. In my case, I work in an outpatient clinic, and so I don't have access to the patient's environment at all. So a lot of times I end up spending a lot of time talking with my patient about, okay, what does your setup at home look like? And what are, the things that you have available to you that can help make us feel really safe, really successful in sending you home with these exercises. So, one thing to keep in mind is that technology is amazing, and technology can be really, really helpful when it comes to having a patient go home and take a video of what their kitchen setup looks like, what their living room setup looks like. And I have patients do this a lot. So I'll say, okay, your homework for this week is these 3 exercises. And also, I want a video of your environment so that we can make this really work for you when I send you home with these exercises. Um, yeah, so those are some ways to kind of strategize with your patient about how to make this translatable and transferable to an environment outside of like a formal clinic setting. All right. And then the fifth point, my favorite, is celebrate. So, most of our older adult patients, if you say, "When is the last time you jumped?" they'll look at you with deer in the headlights eyes and say, "It's been about 45 years since my feet both left the ground intentionally at the same time." And that is, a very standard response that I get. But when we start to introduce these motions, we celebrate it. When my patients are in the gym jumping, every single clinician and patient that is also in the clinic with us knows that we're doing something exciting in my session because we celebrate. We are hooting, hollering, jumping up and down. It is a freaking party because it is so cool to give these patients back the power to move their body in ways that they didn't think was possible. It's so, so neat to have your patient with a huge grin on their face, laughing, jumping in the clinic. I mean, nothing is more fun than that. It makes them feel like a kid again. And I have had patients who look at me and say, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait to go home and do this with my grandkids or my great grandkids. I can't wait to show my family at Thanksgiving that I can do a jumping jack." How neat is that? And outside of the fun that comes with jumping and impact is really those health benefits, those bony benefits that we know come from putting that load through our joints. So, the 5 tips for introducing jumping to our older adult patients are number one, start with education and make that education meaningful to the patient in front of you. Number two, respect irritability. This can go really wrong. Don't make that mistake like I did. Really make sure that you are intentionally underdosing when you need to. Number three, make it scalable. Give your patient that power to make those decisions and decide, is today a day that I can level up? Number four, strategize for home so that they feel safe and successful. And number five, celebrate it. Thanks for joining me today. And if you want to get more experience implementing these things into your clinical practice, please, please join us at a course. Our level 1 and level 2 online cohorts start up in January. And we have live courses coming up in Hendersonville, Tennessee, January 18th, Athol, Idaho, January 25th, and Carson City, Nevada, February 1st. Thanks, guys.